Kevin Hinks on this Tuesday morning. It's now time for our Hashtag segment. We're going to be showcasing the financial technology space, really talking about PayPal and what this company has done to disrupt this space over the years. To help us do that, I want to welcome in TD Ameritrade Network contributor Jenny Horn joining me here in studio. And from LikeFolio.com, the co-founder Landon Swan is with us as well. And so, Jenny, these companies are incredible, and it's hard to talk PayPal without also talking Square. They have really been on the forefront of this disruption in a space that arguably has been ripe for it, as so many others have, as technology has become more and more a part of our lives.
Absolutely, and I think Square has done a great job, no pun intended, giving PayPal a run for its money, because it's a much newer company, yet it sort of operates now in this very same fintech space. And like you mentioned, this adoption of sort of digital payments has really accelerated over what they're calling the great lockdown of 2020, when it was a time when we had to be socially distant, while also still, functioning and living our lives. And these peer-to-peer payment options really allowed people to do just that. And to paint a scale of how big peer-to-peer payment apps really became, of course, PayPal's being Venmo, they grew from their total transaction value of about $4 trillion to over $5 trillion in just 2020 alone. So growing by about $1 trillion over the last year. And I think this accelerated adoption is what's really kept a PayPal and a Square sort of ahead in this digital payment space, and becoming now this sort of one-stop shop for all things involving, of course, money. They recently indicated they will be, offering it potentially trading. They also now have their crypto offerings where you can buy, hold, and sell crypto for less than $1, which is, of course, very appealing to, say, someone with less capital that doesn't want to trade such large amounts of Bitcoin. And it's actually interesting, we talk about this with Bitcoin seeing a pretty volatile swing today within the last, 10 minutes since I've been looking at it. But this feature that they can trade crypto, they recently announced expanding to actually their British customers a few weeks back, and they will also be able to buy, sell, and hold cryptocurrencies. And this is actually the first move internationally for PayPal to offer their crypto products since launching in the US last year. So they are expanding rapidly. And Alex and I were talking before the break about how now, where you once just went on Venmo and you were quick about it, you were just in and out of the app, they're making Venmo sort of the one-stop shop for all, which gets a customer not only on Venmo, but staying on Venmo. And I think that this is what sort of disrupted these traditional, financial institutions, but also these traditional credit card companies like, say, a Visa, a MasterCard, an American Express, which is what I saw a lot of buzz on Twitter today. So that brings me to our first tweet, which says, Square and PayPal beating Visa and MasterCard in the last couple of years, and I think it will continue to do so in the next years also. And if you look at these companies all on a comparative chart, you can see really just that outperformance. Square and PayPal up about 22% year to date, Visa only up about 2.5% year to date, just to paint a picture of their performance relative to even this year. But our next tweet talks about a little bit more about PayPal, specifically price activity as of recently, which says, PayPal, a beauty, been short put spreads for weeks looking for that 270 level to hold, and it sure did. Has that earnings gap overhead to fill eventually too. So from a trading perspective, if you just look at these names year to date, but also longer term, you can truly see what was this increased digital adoption with these companies. And really their price activity shows just that. These have been consistent outperformers. They've been consistently strong names. And also they've been sort of fun to watch as we've become in this new normal. So Landon, I'm very excited to see what your data has to say on PayPal, because I have been saying for so long now that this cashless world was coming, and it's sort of here now, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. PayPal's been huge for a long time. For forever it was just eBay. You buy something on eBay, you pay with PayPal. They split up, and now eBay is actually only 4% of PayPal's volume, which is incredible how far they've come moving away from that. And also, even though everybody thinks, PayPal's got Venmo and that's got to be a big part of it, that's actually only about 4% as well. So PayPal's really growing just organically and doing all the things with innovation, because all the things that you talked about, and especially the cryptocurrency, just ways to innovate, and they're using QR codes and all kinds of stuff that you thought was like 10 years ago and dead, but it's actually coming back, and pretty incredible that PayPal's making this comeback. And you can see here from the mentioned growth, you talked about the lockdown and the effect that had. Of course, it was positive for anybody who can pay remotely, like with PayPal. You see that spike there, but It also we're continuing an uptrend. It's sort of accelerating over the last few months. You can see there that blue line, that's the 90-day moving average of people just talking about PayPal in general. Very strong numbers out of that. And what's really interesting is, you have to compare them to Square. And we've got the earnings score that we put out every week from -100 to +100. Now, these companies aren't reporting until I think late October for PayPal, early November for Square. But if the earnings were coming up, we did a little calculation just to see, PayPal would be a +14 right now. Square would be a -8, which isn't huge. But the fact is that Square is actually lower than PayPal by 22 points is incredible, because I don't think we've ever seen Square have a lower number than PayPal. And so it's actually interesting that PayPal is sort of making this comeback. It's not only mentions, but it's happiness. And you can see here, this is the gain in happiness over the last year. So PayPal and its subsidiary Venmo are doing much better than Square and its subsidiary Cash App. You can see a big difference here. Now, Square's still higher on happiness, but the change is that PayPal is making that comeback. So very strong numbers out of PayPal. Kind of didn't see it coming, frankly. I mean, if you had asked me a year or two ago what I thought about PayPal, I said, well, I think they're kind of, they're on their way out, but they've innovated their way back into relevance. They've kind of shed the eBay anchor and reliance on eBay, and now they're doing a lot with their technology and their innovation. So good for them. Looks like they're on their way back, and I'm really interested to see how things play out with crypto because of what's happening today. It's incredible. A big change for all these companies because so much of their revenue does come from cryptocurrencies.
Landon, there's a lot to unplug there, but I think you just brought exactly where my question was going to go, which is, when you compare these companies, PayPal, 400 million people, monthly active users. Is this kind of a, Square was definitely a high profile name and getting a lot of sexy headlines and Jack Dorsey involved. Well, isn't this kind of the PayPal Square relationship? Isn't this developing into kind of a Home Depot Lowe's relationship, Nike, Under Armour relationship, where they compete, but one is really significantly better than the other, correct?
Yeah, one is much larger. I mean, if you look at market cap, PayPal it's nearly 3 times the market cap of Square.
Right.
Really much larger. So I think there's a little David and Goliath thing going on, but David's kind of sexy and cool, right? Because Square is just more hip. It's got the cool users. PayPal's the dinosaur Goliath. It's slow moving, and everybody thinks it's on its way out, including myself a year or two ago. But it's really done very well to leverage its user base. And I think one thing that people like you and I don't really think about is, we're a very small percentage of the world population in the U.S. and there are a lot of users out there. And I think Square's probably doing better among people like that we know. But PayPal is international and it has so many users that if they can come up with something that increases their dollars per transaction or their number of users, and they just flip that switch, it goes to so many more people. So the leverage is there for these larger companies. So, a lot of times I think that analysts, including myself, will kind of count out the big slow player, not remembering that they've got the leverage, they've got the distribution, and maybe they take a little while to get there on the technology, but once they do, they take that advantage of user base and really stretch it to just sort of push the competition off a little bit. I mean, this competition's far from over, but PayPal is not giving in to Square by any means.
They sort of took something out of Apple's book, Landon, let their competitors prove concepts and then just do it maybe better or at least the same with the bigger kind of backing of a user base and offering those different functions and features. A couple comments and then a question for you, Landon. First off, in PayPal, they've in a way almost been a beneficiary of some of the negative headlines out of a company, maybe like a Facebook with kind of the data stuff. Is the most common interaction I have with PayPal is maybe trying to save some time, be efficient on an online checkout, where that may have been a Facebook in the past to fill out my information, but maybe I don't have that goodwill with a company like Facebook that I may be used to, and now PayPal comes in to do that. But my question for you is, Landon, how come the legacy PayPal app wasn't able to take off amongst people the way Venmo was? Was it simply just the social networking and the emojis? Was that all it needed to have in a new name? Because PayPal has been around doing this forever, and it took Venmo to make it mainstream.
Yeah, I think it was the app itself. I mean, I really do. I think that PayPal, correct me if I'm wrong, but you go back to Venmo's genesis maybe 15 something years ago. And I think I've mentioned this before. Andy and I were like beta users on there, so we have like very early accounts. But I think that at that time, Venmo was an app and PayPal was a website. And there's a big difference in engagement. You know, notifications and things like that are just different with an app. It's just a better experience. So PayPal's, obviously they've got an app now, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when Venmo launched, they were an app and PayPal was still a website. And it was still like, you thought of PayPal and it's just like, well, that's what you use to pay on eBay. And that's really all it was. I think it had that sort of, I don't know if stigma is the right word, but it had that association where everyone assumed that's really all it was good for. Whereas Venmo marketed itself as this peer-to-peer payment thing where, you know, you have dinner with friends and you split the bill on Venmo, or, you know, you lose a little money on the golf course, you pay with Venmo, that kind of thing. So I just don't think that PayPal marketed itself that way, and they were too tied to eBay in everyone's minds.
Yeah, I completely agree, Landon. And I actually have paid rent using Venmo. That's how trustworthy it's really become in my life. So it's an incredible app, honestly. And I guess my question for you is actually less about PayPal and Venmo, is more about these other companies that compete that are smaller, say an Affirm, an Afterpay. We saw obviously a big splash when Affirm announced this partnership with Amazon. But is this a concern for Affirm? Because PayPal, being the fact that it sort of takes a page from all these smaller companies, also has this buy now, pay later feature, this pay in four sort of like loan installment option. Is that a concern for some of these smaller fintech companies who are really trying to compete, but PayPal is just sort of such a behemoth?
Yeah, so okay, as an entrepreneur and, you know, sometimes an advisor to entrepreneurs, this is like something that always comes up, because you've got a behemoth in the industry and you think, well, we can make an app that does this, and they don't do that, so we'll take this huge market share. But there's always a fear in the back of your mind, and entrepreneurs have to understand this, just like Alex talked about. What if you go prove it out and then they say, all right, we'll roll it out to our hundreds of millions of users? You're dead. And so it's a very scary thing as an entrepreneur to try to take on the behemoths by just out featuring them, because for you, that feature costs 100% of your budget or your resources. For them, it's 0.1%, and they're waiting until you prove it. So I think it is very scary for the smaller players. That being said, Square was once a smaller player, so it can be done. It's just a matter of weighing those risks, because, you know, Kevin, as he talked about, what is it, 400 million users? That's incredible. It doesn't take much to roll something out and just completely wipe out a very small player.
Landon, we got to run, but I'm certain we'll come back to this conversation probably in the next coming months here ahead of the next earnings release, and we're looking forward to it. The co-founder of LikeFolio.com. Thanks as always. Jenny, I'm looking at the